Going live now, so it's live.
It's live now. Okay.
Alright, it's live, people. Inna alhamdulillah wa kafah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulil mustafa wa ala ibadi alladhina irtada wa man bihudahum ihtada wa bi athari ahli al-madinah iqtafa wa ba'd. Fasalamu Allahi ala al-qawm. People, ahlan wa sahlan. I'm just checking if this has gone live. I think it has. Awesome stuff. Right, so I was going to say, actually, Shaban, if there's any, if in case I miss any certain questions or anything, if you see them, just shout them out. All right, people. Ahlan wa sahlan, ahlan wa sahlan. Right, since you guys are the guests, really, it's all about you. That's what it's about. So, what's on your mind, people? What's on your mind? What's the fitan and fasad saying? I hope you guys are conquering the fitan and fasad out there. Allah, he's already got a question. He's like, oh, my question.
Two questions.
If you want to start with two questions.
Two questions, I'll start off with two questions.
My first question is, I've never understood this topic. Allah says,
so why understand it now if you've never understood it really? Life's been going so well and you've never understood it. So why understand it now? Why disrupt the pattern? Go for it.
I've read many literatures on the topic. Allah says in the Quran that if you're in doubt, produce something like it.
Okay.
What does that mean? Ex-Muslims or atheists have said that especially in the past, people have produced masterpieces in Arabic.
Okay.
So I'm puzzled. First question is, what does Allah mean by that?
By this it.
And how do you rebuttal the answer of the atheists who say that look, it has been produced? That's my first question.
Oh, that's the first one. The first one. Go on then, what's the second? You better match up to the first now. That's like you've set such a standard.
The second one, I think a lot of people don't, and myself, I'm not understand. I've read many books on Ulumul Quran in English. I still don't understand it. You've done an amazing talk on the silent manuscript, and you explained why Ibn Masud didn't have Surah Fatiha and the last two surahs. You explained the background. But one thing I didn't understand for many years is, for example, I don't know if 7 qira'ats or 7 what it is, but for example, in one verse, it'll say...
We're still dealing with the question, people. I'll explain the question once we finish the question.
One verse says singular, in another qira'ah or something, it says plural. It's like me saying, I went to the shop and bought one biscuit. For example, there's somewhere else I say, I went to the shops and bought 5 biscuits. Is that like a contradiction? They call it variance, so that's what they're saying. Look, these are actual different words replacing. I didn't understand that in your talk on the silent manuscript, or it wasn't broken down.
So what's the question?
My question is.
Sorry, it's going at such a speed. I was like.
My question is, how do you answer this? That the Quran, they're saying the Quran has been preserved because this is proof that one verse, Allah says, for example, in one qira'at as a singular word, and somewhere else
it's used to plural.
As plural.
So why the discrepancy? Why the difference of opinion?
And they're both preserved.
Oh, I understand the question now. Wow. I've forgotten the first one though. What was the first question? The first question was on bring a surah like onto this. Second question was discrepancy. Oh, what? Is that something to begin with? People, the question's too intense. What is the thawab? Here's a question. What is the thawab for visiting Bradford Shariff? And that would have been a more interesting, easier to answer question. Depends what you're going to do in Bradford Shariff. All right, so, okay, so first, bit of a heavy question really to begin with, but there's a challenge in the Quran that if you can bring something like onto this Quran. In another surah, Allah mentions that bring something like onto these verses. And in one verse that وَلَوْ اجْتَمَعَتِ الْجِنُّ, even if the jinn and ins get together, they can't bring something مثل هذا القرآن, that like this Quran. So what is this challenge about? And does it still exist today? Is this challenge still there? Now, right, I think this is, first of all, this is an area in which I did mention on one of my lives that I'm recently kind of for the past few months I've been researching, and that research is still ongoing. So if I in the future change some of my views, it's because I'm still reading up on a lot of these things. But I think my understanding so far is that this challenge that Allah said in the Quran was primarily to the Arabs of the Prophet's time. It isn't primarily for people today. It isn't something which Allah was set out for people today, but He set it out for the people amongst whom the Quran was being revealed. That they were being challenged because they were boastful of Arabic, that okay, bring something like onto this Quran. This wasn't something like forever going to be a test, in my understanding, although I accept there is a view that it's like, so some Muslims historically have said this, what I'm saying now. Some Muslims have said this was a test forever. Like people will always, 2,000 years later, you can still apply for that test, as in, let me challenge. The reason I think that isn't the point, because first of all, before I go into that, we need to understand what is it when Allah is saying, bring something like onto it. What is the it? Like, what is the element of the challenge? Like, what are you trying to compare? Is it eloquence? Is that the point? Many people understood that the Quran was speaking about eloquence. This is what many people understood. Not all Muslims understood that. So many people in the past did disagree with that. They said that that wasn't what the challenge was about eloquence. And some Muslims felt that people could have brought eloquent things just like the eloquence of the Quran. So some Muslims held that view. Some Muslims held the view that the Quran contains Arabic and Arabic was the spoken language. And so to say that the Quran's Arabic is miraculous would mean that the normal people's Arabic was miraculous, because they speak in the same language. So it can't be the style that is the challenge. Certain people felt that, and some people even felt that any person could bring Arabic like onto the Quran. That was some Muslims, not the majority though. The challenge of the Quran was in the coming together of the Quran. So the Quran is more than just its style of recitation. Like you've got, let's say you're gonna Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Allahu Samad. Now there's a style to what's being an eloquence, a style, a flow. But the Quran is more than these things. It's not just about like poetry or poetic style or rhythm. So the Quran was about a comprehensive meaning. It was about things like some people said it's to do with, the Quran will prophesize about the future. In some things it does. It was about that, but more than all of these things, I think that it was about the impact it would have on the listener. That the way it would impact the hearts. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. That with the Quran, the hearts find tranquility. So it wasn't just the style, but the impact. So when you're hearing something, it's impacting you. This is, we call this qualitative. It's not something quantitative. It's not about measuring it. It's the qualitative, subjective experience. I'm listening to something. It's evoking an emotional reaction. I'm getting motivated, emotional, and to be fair, that happens with other things as well. You could be listening to a song and it could be causing some impact. You could be listening to music, it causes some impact. Poetry, it causes some impact. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen with anything else, but the Quran strikes that chord. Then in addition to that, apart from the impact, the way this book will be received amongst a people, the maqam that they will give this book, the fact that this book will then go on to serve as a rock upon which generations and in fact a civilization will base itself. All of these things put together was part of the challenge. That you bring something that can do all of that. That the Quran, what you call in Gestalt psychology, was that the whole is greater, the whole of it is greater than the sum of its parts. So if you put, you've got individual parts, but the whole is greater than just the sum of its individual parts. So it's not just about eloquence, it's not just about style, or it's not just about being like this. But when you put it together, there's almost like, I don't mean it in a folkloric or superstitious sense, but like a magic to it. That it has evoked this response, it's had this sanctity in the hearts of Muslims, it's served as the bedrock for their civilization, they've committed it to memory, they've treated it really sacredly. I mean, it's something, bring something that can do that. So that would be the challenge, in my understanding. In that sense, it could still be there today if we take the challenge to mean something which is just to do with the eloquence of the Arabic, like many Muslims thought. So what I've said, Muslims have said this, like people in the past, like Imam Khattabi, Qadi Iyad, other people did say this, that it's a lot of things. It's not just like the eloquence, it's not just this. But if you take it to be just the eloquence, that the Quran is so eloquent, that is the challenge alone, that brings something so eloquent, I disagree that that was the challenge, unless that was just what I was saying earlier on for the early Arabs. So that part, if you take that to be the challenge, then that only for the early Arabs. Today, in all honesty, we can't even appreciate true Arabic, what makes it so, like, even though we understand Arabic, like those of us that have studied Arabic, if we read the Quran, we understand the Quran, but it's, there's subtleties we don't understand. Like, we won't appreciate that, oh, well, they put this particle here, this particle could have been replaced by 5 other particles, but what was the, what is the significance here? Like subtleties, like, I think it was the great grammarian Mubarrid, who's from the Basri kind of, those of you into Arabic grammar, he's from the Basri school. And he's like one of the final dons of the school of Basra in grammar. But Abu al-Abbas al-Mubarrid, now he was asked that you have the sentence like in Arabic, Huwa Zayd, he is Zayd. And he said, what? Innahu Zayd. Like, yeah, like surely, like in the classical like English, surely he is Zayd, like that. But obviously today we don't speak like surely. But it means it's just a bit of emphasis there. Like, Innahu Zayd. It still means he is Zayd. Innahu la Zayd. Lam is just for emphasis again. It's just like saying he's Zayd with an exclamation mark today. Yeah? He said like each one of these 3 things means something entirely different. So he said one would just be a statement, like saying somebody's asking. One would be a response to somebody saying, oh, who's he? And I said, oh, like if I say, oh, he's Shaban. That's a response. He said the other one, like innahu, that this would be where I'm trying to highlight something special about, like, for example, if I'm going to say, oh, that's Shaban over there, sitting over there. Like in that example, innahu, to the extent that you would be like, whoa, it's as though you're not asking who is he, but you're asking, which one is he, like something. And I'm like, oh, that's him. And if I had said, innahu la Zayd, it's like you're saying, nah, that can't be him. The question here would be, that can't be him. And I'm saying, no, that's definitely him. But yet this subtlety in Arabic, in all honesty, we don't really appreciate these kind of subtleties, even if we understand Arabic. This is like people in the past maybe appreciated stuff like this. We today can't, to us it's just, okay, it's nice Arabic. But it's nothing beyond, like we can't fathom. So today, this is why I said that Arabic challenge doesn't really exist in my understanding, because nobody speaks Arabic like that. And even if they try, like nobody, who's going to judge it? Because we can't appreciate that kind of Arabic today. But in their day and age, they could have. And they could have tried to challenge it from that perspective. Today, even the Arabs don't speak Arabic that well. And definitely not on a subtlety level, like the way the Quran is or things like that. And the atheist Quran thing is just, the one I've seen so far, it's just a parody. It's just a kind of like a joke. It's nothing eloquent. I mean, you can bring it up on YouTube. It's just the only thing is it sounds like Quran because they're reading it like the Quran. But the rhythm was never Quran. Like the rhythm, this is something we as Muslims have kind of made up along the way. Like we read the Quran with a rhythm. Like, we recite, like you've got certain styles of recitation. But obviously in the Prophet's time, they never used to read the Quran like that. So today we do that. So we're so used to the Quran being read in this rhythm that if we hear something in that rhythm, we assume it's the Quran. So they've done the atheist Quran where they're saying, what is it? Bismil kufri wal ilhad and this and that in the name of atheism and kufr and laqad I can't remember it, but I saw it. It's basic Arabic, inna hadha what is it? Kitab qad ja'akum min basharin or something. But they're reading it like Quran. So common Muslims who don't understand Arabic, majority of the Muslims don't understand Arabic. So if you hear it, you're just going to think, oh, that's the Quran. And they've done it as a parody just to kind of mock and say, like, can you guys even tell the difference? And they're saying all kinds of things in it, like, oh, that, that your prophet didn't even know that the earth goes around the sun. And, things like this they're saying in it. So, but it's nothing eloquent. It's nothing like, wow. And I'm not saying that just because, being a Muslim, but it genuinely isn't eloquent or anything. It's just very standard Arabic. So but this rhythm of the Quran, I mean, it's fine. Okay, today we read like that. Everybody's used to it. But in all honesty, in the past, people like Imam Malik were very strict against these kind of things. Imam Malik had a very strict personality on these kind of matters of like things to do with what were symbols of the deen, like the Quran. He didn't like people singing it like that, like in, reading it like in that manner. Even the adhan today, like Allah, like all this kind of stuff. He considered that a bid'ah. He was harsh against these kind of things. He felt that, that this was, but other scholars were fine with it. And today it's because it's so widespread and everybody's accepted it, it's fine. I mean, I'm not saying it's such a big deal, but I'm just giving an example that Imam Malik was against these kind of things. He wasn't down with these people reciting the Quran like that, because he said by doing that you're going to lose focus of what it's actually about, and then it's just going to become known as a rhythm, which, to be fair, today it has pretty much just become known as a rhythm, like the way you read it. But yes, so
one question before we come back.
Yeah, cool. Let's go for some people. All right.
So somebody's asking here, how reliable are the classical tafseer, and which ones are more reliable, perhaps?
Tafsir. All right, go on then, people. Name some tafsir. What tafsirs come to your mind? Anybody? Allah, mashallah. Oh, Mufti Rahman, is that you? All right. Always asking about the Jahiliyyah poetry. Online. All right, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari. What else? Have any other tafsirs coming to mind? Ibn Kathir. All right, what do you say? The Kashaf. All right, the Makhsharis, huh? Go on, I don't look at that. Any others, people? Any others? Not. Huh? Nasafi. Whoa, we got some connoisseurs here, some expertise. Oh, Razi, yes, salam. So people, there's so many tafasir in the past. When you're saying classical, I'm not sure what you mean by classical, because everybody's got their own understanding of what classical means. Does classical just mean anything from a few hundred years before backwards? Or does it mean something only 1,000 years ago and prior to that? Or does it mean, like, what does classical mean? But putting that aside, there's a lot of tafsir available. The Ibn Jarir Tabari's, to be fair, tafsir of Tabari is actually probably, it's very early. It's over 1,000 years old. And it is probably more reliable than many tafsir, although it doesn't cover so many things. It is still quite basic. He gives like explanations of certain verses. He'll give some rulings. He tries to bring hadith, and every time he brings hadith, he brings the chains for Hadith, so you can check them up. It is quite authentic. It's like an authentic kind of very, very traditional style of tafsir. The other tafsir which are full of everything, like Qurtubi, Ar-Razi, all these people, they kind of their tafsir. Ibn Kathir is still quite maybe intermediate. He doesn't go into too much detail on things, just stories, what's this, what's that. Yeah, it's difficult really saying what tafsir is authentic. Because a lot of tafsir, not the problem, but the thing with tafsir is they all come with an angle. So it's like, here's the Quran. What's your angle of explaining it? Your angle is going to be now shaped by your personality. So if you were somebody who loves fiqh, then your tafsir is going to be all about fiqh. So it's all going to be about this ruling here, that ruling there. It's all about rulings. If you were a linguist, your tafsir is going to be all about grammar, all about, tafsir of Nahas, tafsir of, it's called I'rab al-Quran, of Zamakhshari's tafsir. It's all really about balagha, linguistics, rhetoric, style, Arabic. It doesn't mean they don't speak about anything else. They do, but that's the bulk of it. Like, it's very clear. That's what it's about. So it's like today saying that imagine the Quran was there today, and depending on your career, you take that approach. So if you're if you're like a pilot, and then everything you're doing about the tafsir is from that angle, is to do with aviation, is to do with how aerodynamics, oh, this is an amazing verse, it highlights the aerodynamics laws, and it does this and it does that. And each thing you keep bringing in what you're into. And if somebody was, into sports, then they would just keep bringing their flavor into the tafsir of each verse. So it's difficult, really. I would say you have to just explore different tafsir, whatever you're comfortable with. These classic tafsirs like Qurtubi's is good. I do really like it. Tafsir of Razi, I like it. More recent tafsirs of Ibn Ashur, I do like. It's very comprehensive. There's a tafsir in the past, about 7th, 8th century, I think. He's a Hanbali, Ibn Adil al-Hanbali. He's called Al-Lubab. Once again, very comprehensive. There's so many tafasir. I hope that's of some help. It's difficult. Somebody said, Hur al-Ain. Look at that, there you go. Well, I've already answered the question on Hur. Alright, okay, cool people. So what else? Let's take some. Alright, well, hi Mufti Rahman, you're doing it. Come on, what's the question?
I was going to ask, when is the video about the second coming of Isa alayhi salam coming out? Because it can't come out when he
before the coming of Jesus, hopefully.
And any other stuff like Usul al-Hadith classes or fiqh?
Yeah. Yep, I am, inshallah, thinking of beginning some Usul al-Hadith classes. The Usul al-Hadith, I'm thinking of doing them live from here, actually. When I say live, I don't know how I don't think they'll be live like this live, but as in person here, from the Ark. And the fiqh, I'm thinking of teaching online. So, got to still explore 1-2 of the different platforms and teach that online. But inshallah, let's get onto that. Look at that. Look at some questions over here. I can see that. So go on then. What's some question? See the brothers. Go on. What question have you got there? You got a question? No?
What? No.
Question?
No.
Seriously?
No, I don't.
Go on then. Let's take some other questions, people.
So there's another online question. So, is the verse about women that they should stay at home just for the Prophet's wives? Women should stay at home.
Right, okay. The verse of the Quran, وَقَرْنَا فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ, that sit in your homes and go over ma yutla alaykunna, what is being recited over you from the verses of the Quran and things like that, and learn them. And Allah wants to purify you. I think that's a misinterpretation. Allah didn't mean for them that they have to sit at home. Because they clearly didn't sit at home. They weren't just women that sat. They went about, they would travel, the wives of the Prophet would go with, whether visit family, visit friends, they would go out and about, they would work, they would travel, so this isn't true that they just sat at home. I mean, it's not, I don't think any of them, as far as I'm aware, ever just sat at home. So, but the verse is talking about the wives of the Prophet. But sit at home isn't the command, that's just coincidental. It's like, if I say, why don't you just sit here and learn what I'm telling you? The important thing that I'm trying to say is learn what I'm telling you. The why don't you just sit here is how it's part of speech. It's how we speak, how we say things. It doesn't, I think some people have taken that and then said, oh, they were meant to sit. But the wives of the Prophet didn't sit at home. I mean, regardless of what people say, there's so many ahadith that they would travel, they would do their own things. So, then some people extrapolate from that women can't go out, so women have to sit at home, which judging by that there's none here, I take it that's in full effect. Right, so but I think that's ridiculous, really, to be honest with you, that I can't, a while back I got into a discussion, it's still on YouTube. I was discussing with Sheikh Abdul Shakur Brooks about this issue, and it came up that he believed, I don't know whether he still believes, but I can only speak of at the time, that a woman can't go out to just have a walk, like she can't go out just for a walk even, it's haram. That is such a ridiculous, I mean, even cavemen wouldn't have those kind of rules. Like, even the Neanderthals would have enjoyed much more freedoms than that. And how backwards do you want to go? I mean, that's like, so these kind of things really damage Islam, because they make Islam look so stupid. And the truth is, nowhere does that happen. Nowhere. Like, I don't know what, I mean, generally speaking, I'm not saying it hasn't happened anywhere. Maybe these kind of things people have done that somewhere, but generally, and I was giving examples that even if you take Muslim countries, like people, they used to all go out, they used to all work. Like if you look at many Muslim, now there's a huge urbanization project across the world. People in the past lived in rural parts of the world. Women worked in fields. In most of these, I gave the example that if you go to places like Pakistan, if you go to the rural parts, if you speak to people who are elderly, like let's say people, your grandmother's age or aunts of that age or those kind of, or even maybe a generation like, maybe I don't know how old people are here, but people slightly elderly, you'll see that they all grew up just working, the women folk, in the fields. They all worked. They all kind of, whether it was, wheat or whatever they were working with, they would work, it wasn't a lifestyle where people just sat at home. And this is a very modern kind of thinking that, we're going to have a house and you're just going to sit in this room. If people did that in the past, they couldn't survive. There's no way that people did things like that. But yeah, so I hope that's of some help. Right, alright, so what? Allah. Go on with the one question since we'll come back to Mutiur Rahman's probably got a very adabi kind of question lined up, about to test the intellect of the Islamic civilization. Let's go for something a bit more.
My question is not as intellectual.
Is it on the Alam Rock level? It's alright, us inbreds will understand it.
I was going to ask you, Mufti, are tattoos permissible in Islam?
Tattoos, alright. Anybody want to advertise some tattoos, half price? Yeah, tattoos are not haram, contrary to popular opinion that they are haram. See, I just make it sound so simple there, people. the truth about tattoos is that in the past, these things, the way today tattoos exist, didn't exist like this in the past. So tattoos have existed in the past, but the purpose behind them was always different. So once you understand that, you realize that today tattoos are an entirely different phenomenon. So even if something did exist, but it doesn't carry that connotation, it's not the same. I mean, things change over time. They carry certain connotations, so in the past, tattoos, if you go back to the time of the Prophet, for example, tattoos were to brand animals. Okay, so they used to brand their animals and they used to brand slaves. So that's how tattoos existed. So they would mark them with these kind of tattoos, and they would mark animals. People still mark them, brand them in some parts of the world and stuff like that. But so they would do that with slaves, and so that was the human side of it, and they would do it with animals. So the Prophet condemned these things. So he condemned washam, which today you translate as tattoos. But what were those tattoos? What was the reality of them in the Prophet's lifetime? They weren't, somebody, some woman had done a tattoo of a butterfly, or some guy had done a tattoo on his arm. It wasn't like that. They weren't doing, these things didn't exist like that. So the way they existed was people would just stain somebody as that he's my slave, or they would do that to animals. So the Prophet prohibited that. Now, over the generations after the Prophet, some tattoos emerged in the centuries after as things like tribal signs. And I'm sure maybe in some cultures they existed already before the Prophet's time, but in Arabia they weren't as tribal signs in the Prophet's time. But so you get today as well certain, let's say the Berber people of North Africa and other kind of tribal regions, even some places in places like Pakistan and other places, you'll get certain elderly people now, elderly women, they might have some kind of tribal kind of tattoos, like sometimes just some dots, or they might put some dots on their hand. And these things are not beautification. Like by putting 3 dots or something on your hand, you don't make the hand more beautiful. It's not, it was like a tribal kind of thing that they just did. Then along the way, I'm sure maybe some people did try to improve on things from a beauty perspective, but this is really more modern. So in recent times, the last century, this has become a huge thing. People do incredible artwork, they do all kinds of things, and drawing pictures, or tattoos as we know them today. So the question would be, this is a very modern thing, which requires a modern evaluation. If you say this is haram, if you say this is haram based on what? So if you say it's haram based on, you're changing the creation of Allah, that's a weak argument. Because even in the past, the way tattoos existed then, many scholars argued against them then. Even people from the Malikis, you've had 1 or 2 scholars in the past, even Imam Qarafi in his Dhakhira, and this is going 600, 700 years ago, argues about tattoos, and they weren't even like today, but they were back then, the tribal kind of tattoos. So he says, but why are they haram? And he says, well, people say you're changing the creation of Allah. And he says, well, what do you mean changing the creation of Allah? He says, isn't cutting your nails changing the creation of Allah? Isn't circumcision changing the creation of Allah? And he's one of the greatest scholars of Islam, and so he's putting these questions, and he says, well, people will say, oh yes, but changing the creation of Allah to deform it. And he said, okay, but he said, what if the tattoos were to enhance it? So he debates this back then when it wasn't, a fashion, and it didn't really exist like it does today. So my understanding is, if you were to use tattoos in such a way to deform you, like you get some people who've changed, you get that, there's some documentary about some guy who's tattooed everything in such a scary way, his whole face, everything, and he can't seem to ever get a job now, and he's wondering why can't I get a job, right? So I would consider things like that haram, to be, to do something like that to yourself, or something if it was dangerous. Like, I don't know, like, I've seen people tattoo their eyes, and I don't know the dangers of it. Seems dangerous, but I don't know if, so they turn it all, like the white part, they kind of dye it, and so it's either all red, or it's black, or it just looks freaky as hell. You've probably, I don't know if you've seen the pictures on Google. Huh? What do you guys spend your time doing then? It's hardly like you're reviving Islam. What are you guys busy with? So, if you look at these kind of things, I would consider haram, either for if they're harmful, or if they're going to completely, you're making yourself, just so scary for people. But just regular tattoos, if people did them, I wouldn't say it's encouraged. I would say it's probably discouraged because of the permanency element. But I wouldn't say haram. So I'd probably say makruh, like it's not something, I don't think Islam would say, oh, it's a great thing, everybody go out there and get tattoos. But it wouldn't be, oh, this person deserves to go to hell because he's had a tattoo. That's my take on tattoos, people, my take. And you'll get a banner coming up here with the discount if you want to have some tattoos. So, right, what's going on? All right. Ya Abu Muawiyah, go on. I suppose we did say to Mufti, but go on.
Just from this question, what about the Hadith Prophet ﷺ where he says, may Allah's curse be upon the woman who gives the tattoo?
Astaghfirullah. See, now, I don't know, some of you would have memorized Hadith as well. Should have told me, I would have come prepared. I thought it's just the average, just the Alan Rock kind of inbred. Right, so you're right, there is a hadith. Damn. How do I get out of this one? Right, and it's in Bukhari. Right, so he wasn't saying tattoo, he was saying the tattoo like other thing. It was an Indian word. That's haram. So, right, so the thing is, this hadith that the Prophet said, may such and such, la'an Allah, may Allah curse al-washimat, wal-mustawshimat, wal-wasilat, wal-mustawsilat, al-namisat, wal-mutanammisat, these women who pluck their eyebrows, and these women who do that for them, and those women who connect their hair with kind of fake hair, and those women who connect it for them, and those who do tattoos, and those who apply the tattoos, and those who straighten their teeth, and those who kind of straighten it for them. And so this hadith, right, with these women on there. Now, first of all, many people like the Maliki madhab now. The Maliki madhab explains that this hadith was speaking about women going through a mourning, not like the morning, wake up in the morning. Wake up in the morning, start filing their teeth. Obviously, if they're not going to get la'na, then what else? Guy is probably trying to sleep. It's like, what's all this goddamn noise? Filing her teeth. Right, so you see, mourning as in like when the husband is dead. He died, bichara. She's still filing the teeth. Right, so when the widow is going through the mourning state, so this is in the Quran, arba'ata ashhurin wa ashra, like 4 months and 10 days. So this mourning state, which has something called ihdad or hidad, which means that the woman during this state, like there's other things as well, like she can't marry, and she's not meant to be kind of overdoing like things like trying to beautify herself, and she's going through a state of mourning and grief and like that. So the Maliki madhab said this hadith was for women in that iddah period, not for women generally. So the Maliki are quite unique on this, and I actually like that interpretation. I mean, apart from just being Maliki, I think that is actually an awesome interpretation. The other interpretation by people like Ibn al-Jawzi, not Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. So there's Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and there's before him, about almost 2 centuries before, there's Ibn al-Jawzi. So Ibn al-Jawzi is the main, Abu al-Faraj Ibn al-Jawzi. and he sets up a kind of school later on, and Ibn al-Jawziyah's dad ends up generations later working in that school. So that's why he kind of supervises the school. So he's called Qayyim al-Jawziyah. The madrasa was al-Jawziyah. So Qayyim is somebody that watches over something, like a manager, I guess, like makes sure everything's fine. So he's the manager's son. This is Ibn Qayyim is basically the son of the manager, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. So Ibn al-Jawzi, in his book of Ahkam al-Nisa, he writes that this hadith was simply, the Prophet was telling those women off, a particular type of women in Medina, who were imitating certain prostitute women. And it was this is what he writes in his book, he says it was for them, these actions in and of themselves weren't haram, but it was just that the Prophet didn't like that they were doing this particular fashion that was generally adopted by, of their age, prostitute women. So that was his interpretation. So not everybody understood this hadith to mean, some people have, you're right, some people think this hadith means women can't, so women can't straighten their teeth, for example, and they just they all end up like that Shamima Begum. Right, so the thing is, so they can't straighten their teeth, or they can't pluck their eyebrows, and they've got like bloody cyclops eyebrows, right? Obviously, that's because they hadn't seen Asians, and that's or Pakistanis. But that's not. You see, it's silly to say that. Oh, like a woman's going to straighten her eyebrows. I don't know, and now she's just going to get thrown into hell. That's like such a silly thing. It makes no sense. Like, what's the sense in that? Like, how does that even make any sense? So, exactly. So it makes much more sense that this is what it's talking about. Because if you say these things are changing the creation of God, I mean, really, changing the creation of God by straightening your eyebrows. That's like saying that then you shouldn't be able to cut your hair. Then men shouldn't be able to cut their hair. And, like if they shouldn't, should they? Like by that standard, you shouldn't be able to cut your nails, shouldn't be able to have circumcision. Because if God wanted you circumcised, should have made you be born circumcised. Why make you be born with some foreskin and then tell you to cut it off? Like, so if you're going to say doing everything is the change in the creation of Allah, then that applies to everything else. You've got to, somebody just laughing their head off on that, right? So, but then that argument, you got to be fair, you got to be just. Like, if you got to use, this must be consistency. That's what I'm saying. I believe that you can make modifications to the body. It's not like it's not haram, because hence circumcision is more healthy, it is more hygienic, it does prevent a lot more diseases. Even today, the studies show that people circumcised are much less likely to contract. I mean, they can still contract, let's say, sexual diseases, but they're much less likely than their counterparts with foreskin, for example. Studies will show this. Things like, so you see that there was wisdom and hikmah and other things as well in these kind of rulings. But so you can change the creation. Obviously, if you're going to say, well, tough, the woman just has to soldier it out. Like if she's got like these big eyebrows like that, she just soldiers. Then the question is, okay, what if she's got a beard? Some women have beards. You've seen like some women, bro. Some women have beards. They have like a mustache. I mean, they don't have to have it like that. Obviously, it would be a bit weird if she twirls it as well. Right? She adds like Chaudhry before her name or something. Right? The thing is, but you get this. So would it be haram for them to remove their hair? And some people might say, yeah, and this is being stupid. So you're taking the religion from something amazing and turning it into something which ends up becoming silly and looking stupid and embarrassing. And so, yeah. So people, it's all...
We need the questions in here before...
You cannot. Sarah Ali saying what? Sarah Ali saying fake Mufti. Who's Sarah Ali? She's on to us, people.
Go on, Mufti.
Yeah.
Oh right, sorry, yeah,
You
Matiara.
briefly touched on Hubb al-Udri, but
Lover, Mr. Lover. Hub means love, people in Arabic.
included in Islam, like let's say for people that can't get married.
To have love,
No,
make love.
Hubb al-Udri, like writing poetry about each other, this kind of stuff. Like without getting married or anything like that.
Oh, just writing poems about girls. You naughty. Go on, read out your poems. Go on, we're all gonna hear them. Go on, Mufti. Mufti wants to share some poetry for all the beautiful women out there. What is some poetry that you've got?
So it's not getting too hot for you, is it?
It's getting a bit warm.
Toasting it.
So the heating was on. Right, yeah. So what? Have you got a poem? Seriously, go. Don't be shy. You can, of course, you can say poetry about people. Do you mean making it very specific about a particular girl? Just getting her in trouble. You just start making all these poems about a particular girl, and her family are like, "Why is he making all these poems about you?" She's like, "Well, I believe." Right. So, what's gone then? What's the? Or do you mean about women in general?
Both, like.
Or men in general? Don't know what's... You got, it's 21st century, 2019, we got this fluid people out there. So, poetry is fine, and you can say any kind of poetry. You can... it can be romantic, it can be very explicit, it can be. There's nothing... In fact, you see, even though in the Islamic time as well, to be fair, there's been very explicit poetry as well. The Jahiliyyah poetry is extremely explicit. It's, full of war, sex, everything. Islamic poetry as well, during the Islamic time, it changes, depends on the poets. Some of them are full of alcohol. You get this turn towards alcohol. There's a lot of poetry on alcohol. Once again, some of them on sex, other people on things. There is just pure romantic poetry as well, like the Majnoon Layla, for example. And in Arabic, you have many of them. So you've got obviously Majnoon Layla, Majnoon's. But Antara is from pre-Islam.
Oh.
You're talking about that Antara, the Mu'allaqat one, or you're talking about a different Antara?
Is there a different one? I thought Layla Majnoon was from Imran al-Qais.
Yeah, Antara ibn Shaddad, the first one. Yes, so he's from before Islam.
Okay.
Now you've got other poets like, what is it? I mean, you've got some kind of players that kind of emerge on the scene in early Islam. There's the famous, what's his name, yaar? Umar ibn Abi Rabi'ah. That's him, yeah? Umar ibn Abi Rabi'ah. The one he does a lot of, he's in early Islam, within probably 100 years of the Prophet. His poetry is very famous. His is very kind of just trying, what they call taghazzul and tashabbub, where he's just going to be trying to chat up all kinds of girls and do all of that. But then you get other poetry starts to change. They start to praise kings. There's a lot of poetry about praising kings and stuff like this, and it changes as well, the style. But you can do taghazzul. This is in Arabic, they call it taghazzul, doing just about women, just saying things, praising women, saying they're this, they're that. And a lot of poetry is full of that. No.
Just because they did it doesn't mean it was right.
Allah, what a question. Wow, wow. Now Islam has some hope.
You got the verse of the Quran. إنما حرم ربي الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن.
SubhanAllah.
So, I mean, how would you...
It was as though the verse was revealed onto me only that day. MashaAllah. What's your name, huh?
Ziyad.
Ziyad. Ziyad, you do.
I'll message you
On which one?
on Facebook.
On Facebook. As Ziyad.
Yeah.
You're doing it, Ziyad, you're doing it. Right, so just because the poets in the past, people, flirted in their poetry doesn't make it okay. That's a good point, but the question is more about, you see, to make something, you got to understand something. By default, everything is halal, unless proven otherwise. Now, unless you disagree with that principle, some people do. Some people might say everything is haram unless proven otherwise, which is stupid. Because then, like, to move this, I need evidence to say I can move this. To do anything, I need evidence, which is stupid, which isn't how normal majority of the Muslims all accept everything by default is halal, unless proven haram. So to prove something haram, you need clear-cut evidence. So the question here is, what is it that's haram about poetry? Is it just speaking about a woman that is haram? Like let's just say it's women in general. There's no specific woman. You're not just kind of targeting a particular woman, like making her the focus. In some poems they did, like Jaun Elia. Like Majnun is Qais, by the way. His name was Qais. So Qais, or whether there was what's his name, Jamilu Buthaina, and there was Kuthayyiru Azza. And these are famous. You know, like in Urdu they have like Hir Ranja and all these kind of. So these are like the famous Romeo Juliets of the time. Now, in these kind of poems, they always just speak about their particular girl, that's it. But in main poetry, they usually speak about anybody, and they usually throw in names that they probably made them up, or they might have been somebody, but people don't usually know who that girl is. They just use a name, you know, like you'll get in the past, all these kind of names in famous poems. So my point is, if that was haram, why would it be haram? What would make it haram? What do you feel is the haram element there?
Like just the fawahish.
Like what? The sexual talk?
Yeah.
Oh, cha. We have a Puritanist amongst us people. Why is sex? Is it disgusting? Is it? It's like disgusting. Is it like that? Is it like huh?
Two men and then maybe.
If it's between two men. Which that up the gear there. That got a bit. Okay. Now the thing is that, look, cultures are different. You have to remember that the Arab culture is not like our Indo-Pak culture. Our culture is very sensitive. Our culture, I was thinking the other day, it's actually so weird that we don't even have, like, we're so sensitive on anything sexual. So sensitive that everything is like embarrassing, or we have like, so let's just take an example. Let's say somebody wanted to speak about, they had to speak about their private parts, let's just say. Right? Not in like a boastful way. Although I'm sure that may happen as well. But now if you take Urdu as an example, there ain't even words for the actual genitals. Like if you take, I mean, there's words that you're probably thinking, but there ain't words that can be used. No, there's words which are like vulgar, but there's no formal kind of words. There's either metaphors or like words that will say things like, like let's say in Urdu, they'll use words like that will mean, the reproductive organ. They'll use that like ala tanasul, like this is like a reproductive organ. But that's like a phrase to explain what it is. Or they might say sharamga, like private parts. This, you know, in his, like, imagine you had to speak to a doctor, probably say, if they had to speak, they'd use words like, these words exist. Like if you're going to speak about an Islamic issue about, you should wash properly, they'll use words like, wash your private part. They don't have an actual formal word. They don't even have a word. Like, I don't mean like, they don't, like the words are either vulgar and they exist on the street level, like swearing. They have words like that. But they don't have a word that you could just say. In Urdu, nothing comes to my mind. Like, and I was thinking, bloody hell, that never really thought of that. What a weird thing. Like, they don't actually have words which are just neutral. So that reflects the culture of the people. This is how these people think. That they think it's embarrassing to use any direct word in any formal capacity. think about it in English. I mean, you could, like if somebody used the word, I'm just saying like, we passed the watershed. If we use the word like penis, that's not that's a formal word. It's not like a derogatory word or a vulgar word. If you said, oh, vagina, obviously if you said it like Bob's and then obviously people understand. But the point is that these are formal neutral words. They're not like, but in Arabic they have loads of words. But in Urdu you don't. So this goes to show that the culture of the people is very sensitive on these issues. They don't like to even discuss them. They don't like to, everything must be a step away, a step removed. So when you're saying poetry, that's why in Urdu poetry, you don't get any obscene poetry. Generally, I'm not saying nobody's made it up. I'm sure they have. But they don't, not like, you'll never get like Ghalib saying a rude poem. Never happen. Like it might be romantic, but it'd never be like sexual. You couldn't do things like, not in the Urdu culture. In Arabic, non-stop. They don't. I mean, in the past, anyway, today, Arabic poetry, however it is, but in the past, they didn't hold back. So, the question comes back to what makes it haram in the Prophet's time? Were these things considered disgusting, or they weren't? They just saw it as natural.
So just expanding on that point there.
Expand on the...
Because obviously the question was about asking or writing these poetry for people who weren't married. So obviously if you're going to write a poem which has a sexual connotation to it, isn't that going to lead towards zina?
So by saying it, you're going to end up going out and just...
Well, if you're like to modernize it, people who end up flirting together all the time, they end up meeting and then etc. So I'm just asking for 2 cents in terms of if that kind of sexual poetry that people write, even a text message these days could, convey similar meanings.
MashaAllah. So people, even a text message can lead to zina, MashaAllah. Mullah Umar is amongst, is in our midst, people. So, now the question, look, I'm not sure what the question is exactly. Like, is it that anything that is flirtatious must be haram?
Yeah, so the question is like, where are the boundaries? Like, obviously if you're sending sexual messages to a girl, she's going to be like... No,
in the past when they wrote poetry, they just made it popular. Like they just wrote a poem and people... It was a bit like celebrities today, like, they... Like, I suppose today you've got social media, but in the past they would just make a poem and other people would just popularize it. And the way it is with songs and things like that, somebody would sing it and then somebody else would sing it and it just become popular like that, yeah.
But what about... from person to a girl.
To a girl, like writing.
Yeah,
writing love poem to a girl. Yeah. Got a lot of romantic issues today, people, going on. See what this is what I like to do. Get to the heart of the issues in the Muslim community. Now what's bothering our youth? It's romantic poetry. Right? Is it haram because it's flirtatious? Look, wouldn't that be natural to be flirting? Mange. They accepted that very easily. You haramis. Sab haram kar rahe hain. They're all doing haram. No, I mean, is it natural? I mean, isn't it natural to be flirting? Is it? You tell me. You seem very experienced on the matter. We're obviously very naive in these.
No, I mean, like, obviously, all friends that I've got, everyone around me is like...
Just flirting all the time around you.
Yeah. So, obviously, then the question is, like, if there's a girl... Because a lot of people these days are in a position where they can't or get married that easily, So, if they're young or in university or whatever, and then they're writing poems, it starts with, like, these phrases or whatever, but then it kind of...
One-liners.
Yeah.
Give us one as an example. Go on.
The question was asked by the brother here.
Right, so, okay. You see, the thing is, look, people say, where are the boundaries? I think everybody knows deep down, right? And as to writing poetry generally, well, generally is generic, and one is specific. If somebody wrote a poem for a girl, now it's a romantic poem. Now, obviously, people may frown upon that from a cultural perspective. They may, in some cultures, they may not. Obviously, in, like I said, the Indo-Pak culture, people might consider these things bad, like, oh my God, why is he writing about this girl? Some cultures, they wouldn't consider it bad. I don't think it makes it haram in any way. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, obviously, the guy's obviously trying his luck. He's thinking, I've got to try somehow, at the end of the day. The alternative is just to be so robotic, but life doesn't work like that, does it? So, I've got a lot of enemies of love here. Ya salam. So what else is bothering? Allah, Mufti Rahman with another question. Go on then, Ibrahim.
So, just to end on that romantic thing.
Ya salam. People look at this. Another romantic question.
No, I'm not going to ask, but I just want to say that Allah does say وَكَوَاعِبَ. So,
What?
وَكَوَاعِب. وَكَوَاعِبَ.
Atraba.
Atraba, yeah.
Acha, mashallah.
Allah himself,
Oh, right, okay, from that. Oh,
Yeah,
right, very good point, very good.
So I just want to give that.
We have to clap upon hearing the word kawa'ib.
And reading the
Kawa'ib.
and like reading
What do you want to translate kawa'ib for our fellow?
big rested.
Okay, that's not talk about getting carried away. Ibrahim just translated that as big-breasted. He was about to take out some pictures to demonstrate that. Whoa. Hold your horses, mate. Exhibit A. I'll just send a group pic quickly. I'll add everybody to a group and send the pictures just so you got... Right, okay, so...
But my question is, what if someone...
People ain't into that stuff.
What if someone doesn't like that? That's not the
Acha,
question.
that wasn't the question.
So, there's a verse, إن الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون
كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من
So
المس.
what does that mean? يتخبط عليهم الشيطان.
What? That changed. We changed topic there. That was like the fastest change of topic I've ever seen. From from kawa'ib, right, to all straight to what does it mean to be touched by the devil? Is there some subconscious thing here going on? Right, so the question, first of all, I just want to say, going back to Ziyad's question, that was a very good point, that there's even imagery in the Quran about women and stuff like this. Obviously, you're trying to, the angle being that this isn't haram, it's just a culture and depends how people speak. To some people, it's okay. To others, they might be a bit too sensitive on certain topics. But I thought that's a good point. The riba question doesn't sound as interesting. Nobody's interested in the riba question. Everybody's like... So go on then. Look at that, Mufti Rahman, to distract us. Go on then. What's your question,
I
Mufti?
don't know anything about Urdu poetry, but what's your favourite poem by Jaun Elia?
By
Jaun Elia.
Jaun Elia. Oh, all right. Are you into Jaun Elia?
I don't know Urdu, so...
Acha, mashallah. Yuhi. Jaun Elia is an awesome poet. I do like him. Great fan of him. He's a bit dark in his poetry, it's a bit, but at the same time, it's very realistic and very sometimes a bit too real, which is like, whoa, you understand? Like he gives, he has these, and I like that side about him. This whole kind of thing, and I've said some in the past that have really stood out. I'm just trying to think. I mean, there's so many. When just put on the spot, he has this one which I've said before, which I've quoted as well quite a bit. That when it comes to me, I'll go through the whole thing. But there's a lot of poets, because you're not into the whole Urdu thing. Those of you that are, he follows on from people like Saghir Siddiqui. To me, I find a bit of a connection between the two. And I find that stark realism really, because poets are usually so much about kind of having this grandiose nature and this whole, I'm everything. Like the way Ghalib and these people will say, Koi aisa bhi hoga ke Ghalib ko na jane. Will there be anybody that doesn't even know of Ghalib? That will there be such a person? Whereas he will be like, Nikal dalo, what is it? Nikal dalo dil se meri yadon ko yaqeen kijiye mujh mein wo baat hi na rahi. Like, take out my memories from your heart. Like, believe me that I don't have that about me anymore. This a whole different level he's on. I find him very fascinating. That he has that halate hal ke sabab halate hali gayi. That shok mein kuch nahi gaya, shok ki zindagi gayi. And just so many like this, once again, that they make you kind of think. So sometimes I do, when I'm just sitting down, I'll go through some Jaun Elia stuff and toba. Got to do the Pakistan. It is a very, it's a very kind of a dark, low kind of poet. I do admire his stuff a lot. But anyway, let's, and he has a lot of that on, on relationships, this thing of where he says things like, ahde rafaqat theek to hai, magar ahde rafaqat theek hai lekin mujhko aisa lagta hai, tum to mere saath rahogi, main tanha reh jaunga. That, like, it's good to have companionship, yet I feel the truth is that you may get to, be with me, but I'll just still remain alone. You understand? Like, he's just lost in his own kind of world. Lost. And there's a word actually I came across that Mir uses, paranganda, which means it's kind of lost, confused in your own kind of world. Mir uses the term paranganda taba, like to be of this lost nature. That he says, kahan paida hain aise paranganda taba log. That where do such lost and these kind of crazy people, where are they born? Afsos tumko mir se sohbat nahi rahi. That it's a shame you never really got to hang around with people like Mir. But Urdu poetry has its own thing to it. But naam, let's take some other questions, people. If we carry on with the poetry, we're going to have to open up some other drinks. Naam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. MashaAllah, brother. First, brother, to say salam. Alaikum assalam. MashaAllah.
My question is, as you know, Ramadan is coming soon, inshallah.
Yes, salam. Is it here already?
No, it's
huh?
good.
Achha.
What could we learn from the Prophet's way of preparing Ramadan, as well as the companions, for us to prepare ourselves?
For Ramadan?
Yes.
Okay.
That's just a good question.
No, mashallah. Very, see, like, that's true fikr right there. Everybody else, romantic poetry, love, Jaun Elia, Antara, what's this, what's that? How can we prepare ourselves for Ramadan? MashaAllah. What's your name, bro? Waqar, MashaAllah. See, that's the kind, there's hope, people, there's hope for this ummah. That some people, they're so far away and how do I even prepare for Ramadan? I suppose, well, the Hadith say that the companions in Sha'ban would start sometimes practicing their fast, sometimes that they would start reciting the Quran. This is what the Hadith say. But I mean, if you want, you can stop eating from now. That's one way to prepare, but I wouldn't advise that one. No, I think it's really good as a passion, but I don't think you need to necessarily be. I mean, it's good that you are, but I'm just saying you don't need to generally be like, right, for next year I need to start preparing and I need to start doing it. I think when it comes, it's good. It's a whole month. It's not gonna just go overnight. You can enjoy it whilst it's here. But if the companions in Sha'ban, they would start reciting the Quran. Some of them would start practicing their fasts. So I think that's good if you want to do that, inshallah. MashaAllah. Nek log hain, mashallah. See, we feel like embarrassed now in front of. Yaar, meri topi kahan hai, yaar? With my. Naam, Ibi, naam.
Second part of my question.
Yaar, bhulta nahi, yaar. This guy doesn't forget anything. Acha. What was your second part of your question?
It was about
About the ikhtilaf, discrepancies in the recitation of the. Why the discrepancies? Well, people, the question is, although we try to ignore it, but he's sitting right in front of me. I still try to ignore him, but the question is, why are there discrepancies in the recitation of the Quran? I think really this is a difficult question. I don't think it was in essence difficult, but it's for us difficult. Why is it difficult for us? Because we've been conditioned. We've been groomed, people, without knowing it. Right, so, you see, post-colonialism, Muslims, colonialism, when it happened, so obviously it was shocking and a lot of tragedies happened. Interestingly enough, it brought an Islamic reaction, which for the time may have been really good. The problem is afterwards, when that immediate challenge kind of went away, it left some question marks. So for example, believe it or not, colonialism, not that it tried to do this, but it ended up reinforcing the concept of ummah amongst Muslims. Like, as surprising as that's going to sound, but the truth is that if you went, let's say, 500 years back, 700 years back, Muslims never really, they had, in the books, there is this thing called ummah, that we are one Muslim ummah, but they never really had that kind of concept. So if you look at the Muslim from 500, 600, 700 years ago, 800 years ago, maybe in very early Islam they did, maybe, in the very early. But shortly after, this concept kind of stopped. And they never, Muslims just got on with wherever they were. They never saw, they had some sympathy, yeah, those people are Muslim as well, but they didn't see any real connection between them and so let's say you took Muslims from Sudan, and you took Muslims from, Khorasan, which would be modern-day Afghanistan. They would have seen zero connection between themselves. They wouldn't have, and it wouldn't have really bothered them what was happening over there, even if it was a tragedy. They might have said, oh, that's a shame, but that's it. It was nothing beyond that. It wasn't, they generally didn't. Now it's a different question, why did they end up like that? Why were they like this? But that is the truth, that is how Muslims were. So when you have cases of, so for example, when the Crusaders come to the Middle East, the Muslim kingdoms in North Africa are very powerful. Very powerful. The Muwahhideen, the Mohads, ruled up to a third of Africa and ruled the Iberian Peninsula in Europe and ruled the Balearic Islands during the time of, what's his name? Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur, who built, those of you that have seen Morocco, you've probably seen, they have the Qutubiyya. Have you seen the Qutubiyya? That kind of squared out kind of minaret, which you have. It was built by him. The city of Rabat in Morocco was built by him. It's called Rabat al-Fath. It was built up in a time when they were in great glamour and really powerful. They weren't just anybody. They were ruling. The Mohad dynasty had ruled over Africa what no dynasty had ever ruled. It ruled that much, almost a third of the entire African continent. Huge, that is. In his time, Salahuddin writes to him, for example, that will you send us some military support for the Crusaders? He said, no, not interested. He just says, wa alaikum assalam, nah, it's okay. The point is that it wasn't because he didn't like him, but the truth is in the past there wasn't this concept of ummah the way it is today. Ironically, colonialism reinforced that. Because colonialists, where they went around the world, they were kind of grouping people together, saying, oh, well, those people are Muslims, these people are Muslims. So what happened is this force, and the fact that they're suffering from the same enemy, this ended up bringing people kind of psychologically together. So people started to share in each other's pain, and then, oh yeah, we are one ummah, we are one like this, and then that narrative emerged. And one would easily say that is definitely like a good thing. We definitely have this today, that if you went somewhere today, people feel that, oh, they are Muslims, we are Muslims, it doesn't matter about the race, it doesn't matter about this. So this exists today. Now this, like I'm saying, the irony is that it came about after, with actually the rise of colonialism. As they were going in different places, they were doing, like on a totally separate note, but a similar thing is like Hinduism. So Hinduism, it wasn't actually called Hinduism. It was called Hinduism by the British. So Hindus, the way they just believe in different gods. So this village would just believe in a different god, that village would believe in a different god, and they just had tolerance. Like you just get on with your god, they worship Krishna here, they worship whatever Hanuman over there, they worship Ganesh over there, they worship Ram over there, they worship Shiva, they worship Vishnu. They just do their own things. They didn't have this, and they didn't call themselves, we are Hindu. This was actually, the British needed to put them together. So said, oh, they are Hindus. We're called Hinduism. And now they call themselves Hindus as well, because based on that understanding. So in a similar way, it happened, not exactly the same, but in a similar way with Muslims as well. Now that may be a good thing. Another thing is that when colonialists were attacking Islam, so part of the Muslim reaction is to reinforce things. They started to come up with things, Muslims did, to strengthen the Muslim morale. Yeah. So like one thing was, we have a Muslim identity, they started to say. Now here, a lot of things came, like things like we have a particular way of dress, which today we're still suffering from, by the way, because this was invented at that time to reinforce a message against colonialism. We won't speak English, we don't speak their language, we don't do this, we don't do that, these kind of things. But about the Quran as well. Now about the Quran, people started to say, look, we're not like them. Our book is not like the Bible. The Bible has been changed. The Quran, a single letter of it hasn't been changed. Now you see, this is a nice statement, but the problem is that people obviously hammered this out. Like, Islam is everywhere the same. Quran, everywhere the same. You could go from Malaysia to Mali to, parts of China to Mauritania. You could go anywhere to Arabia. The Quran is the same. And people were reinforcing this message against who? Against the colonialists who at that time weren't atheists. They were mainly Christian. So they were trying to Christianize, they were trying to proselytize, convert people to Christianity. They were trying to find faults in the Quran. So the Muslim response was like this. Now, one could say, well, okay, that was fine. It served a purpose and it was good. The problem is that when that problem went away, so colonialism has now long gone, we are still left with this after image of, okay, the Quran is identical everywhere. The problem is now with social media and things, we've realized, oh, well, actually it isn't absolutely identical. It's close enough, but it's not exactly the same everywhere. Now, the problem is, because we've had decades of this being conditioned, it's causing cognitive dissonance. Like, we don't know how to handle that. Whereas if we never had that conditioning, it would have just been natural for us. We would have just thought, oh, okay, the Quran, some parts have been read in different ways. Now, but because we had this other narrative hammered into, like for generations, into people, now when they come across differences, it's difficult to handle it. So places like Indo-Pak have also been very conservative on just their practice. Like, let's say most of them Hanafi. Now we're going to pray like this, and now anything different is unacceptable. It's only in the last 2-3 decades that I suppose the Salafi movements have begun there, Ahlul Hadith, they've started to do different things. People have then gone out to Hajj, a lot more people have gone to Hajj, realized, oh, other Muslims do things differently. we're not, it's okay to be a bit different. But this is a new thing, that it's okay to be a bit different. So the Quran as well, so this is the challenge, okay? Is the topic, it's difficult, not because it's difficult per se, but because we've been conditioned. Yep.
You want to finish your point?
No, go for it.
So, I mean, this is...
It can all wait. I mean, it's only the topic
like
of...
If you go quite far back into Sunni Islam, and so the classic debate over arjulakum or arjulikum in wamsahu bi wujuhikum or arjulikum. So, but people created like Aqidah differences with the Shia.
I mean, sure. I mean, but that's not my point. My point was saying that, look, the Quran, what we know is that when the Quran was revealed, it had some fluidity to it. We don't fully understand that today, but we know that the companions read it in slightly different ways. Now, we seem to understand that there must have been some kind of license from the Prophet for them to do that at the time. So you have the famous story which everybody, Sayyidina Umar heard somebody reading the Quran, and he said, why are you reading it differently? He took it to the Prophet, and the Prophet said, read it. And he said, yeah, that's okay. And then he said, how do you read it? He said, yeah, that's okay as well. I'm assuming, I could be wrong, this is just an analogy. It's a poor analogy, but it's an analogy, okay? I'm assuming that these differences were like saying things like how you have American English and British English. So the way people, the tribes had their own ways of speaking as well. Like, so the way they'll use certain words in American English that we don't use as much, or we might use, but it's considered slang, or we might have a different way of saying it, they might have a different way of saying it. So these things, in a similar way, the tribes had their ways of saying things. So this tribe might use this word. So even if it's little things like in English, like the Americans won't say isn't. Like they don't say isn't, do they? They say ain't, isn't. I mean, ain't, we say ain't as well, but that's a slang. But they don't have that word, like is not, they don't contract that, do they? American English doesn't contract that. So things like this are small, like whether we read like whilst. I mean, we can say while as well, but in British English you still say whilst, amongst. But they won't say the T's in the American English, isn't it? Like things like these kind of subtleties and other actual words, like phrases of that what Americans use more, we don't. I'm just trying to, it's a poor analogy, but I'm trying to give you an analogy of understanding that the tribes were like that as well. So when the Quran came, my understanding was the Prophet let them recite it in what would be natural to them. So it would. Now, what seems to have happened is after the Prophet, some people have started, maybe there's been some confusion or there's been certain things. We know that did happen. So hence some of the companions said, look, let's narrow this down because we don't want other people getting confused and this leading to debates. So Uthman radiallahu anh came up with a script that you can write it in that didn't have the vowels on it. So it still allowed certain variations. It still allowed a certain way of reading, but it was within a certain script. Now that narrowed it. We call this today the Uthmani script. Okay, Al-Mushaf al-Uthmani. That is the main Quran that everybody has around the world. However, certain vowels can be read differently. Because remember, back then they never had vowels. They never had the dots written so well. So some people just read it how it made sense. Now,
is it true that Imam Malik considered it bid'ah to put the dots in the Musaf?
That's a good point, actually. It does sound like him, but I'm not so sure if that he would have. I know he didn't like people just writing things on the Mus'haf. Like, the way people write on the Quran and stuff like this. He didn't like any of that stuff. The dots, by his time, were obviously there in that way. Whatever, I mean, not the way the vowels weren't there like the way we have them today, but obviously it was much more clearer than it was from the earlier time. So I don't think he would have objected to that because he would have received it like that already, like he would have grown up with that. But I think he definitely was against like people writing things like, like people write notes on the Quran sometimes, or they write like the meaning of a word, or nowadays people write their names, things like this. He didn't like any of this. And to be honest, I totally agree with that sentiment. I think people shouldn't, I mean, I know sometimes people, if they're learning the Quran and the Mus'haf might get mixed up, so they write their name, but otherwise you shouldn't write anything on the Quran at all.
Well, what if you gave the example of the Cont.What manuscript that said La taqul bismillah in Surah
Yeah.
So the other day I was reading Surah At-Tawbah and accidentally said bismillah. I'm not asking about that, but
Kafir.
Okay.
He was reading Surah At-Tawbah and he began it with Bismillah. Clear kafir, people, clear kafir. Stone him.
Then that for me would help. Like if I speak
If you wrote, yeah, I mean, there is that, but then, then there's obviously what Islam says. I mean, we can go with what you say, but we can go with it's what Islam says as well. I mean,
So you know how I talk about like melodic and stuff, and how the Arabs used to talk in a certain way. For example, the differences between lam or inna and stuff like that. Can we kind of attain or be able to notice those subtleties by going into jahili poetry?
Can we appreciate? Yes, of course. So the question, so just in case you guys didn't hear it, is that, look, I mentioned earlier on about the subtleties within the Arabic language. Can we today appreciate these subtleties? We can, but by being told. So when we go through tafseer, like some tafseers are dedicated to these subtleties, like you mentioned Kashaf of Zamakhshari, or some of these tafseers are dedicated to literary subtleties. So they're going to say, oh, by the way, this lam here is so amazing and it means all these things. You're probably saying, oh, wow. Well, now that you read it, you're going to appreciate it. But the question was, if nobody told you, would you still appreciate it on that level? I don't think we today would appreciate it unless we're being told. So when we read the tafsir and it says that, oh, by the way, this could have been expressed here in these different ways, and this style was so much better for this reason. And then you think, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. But on your own, you might appreciate some, but I don't think we would comprehensively appreciate them all, because they're very, to us, it'll just sound good, but there's layers deeper than just good. There's wow, totally mesmerizing layers. But obviously, yeah, go for it. Question from online people.
The question is, what are the conditions for something to be haram? This question is asked by Frodi Frobri.
What are the conditions?
For something to be haram.
What are the questions? What is happening with the thing? That is in question of being haram?
He's just asking, what are the conditions for something to be haram? Legally, I think.
Huh? Legally? Frodi Frobri, can you expand on... Who the hell is Frodi Frobri? Can you expand on what does it mean to be... No, because I'm thinking, when you say something to eat, something to do, something to... what happens to this thing? Where does it go? Well, as in, where do you put it? As in, is it you eat it? Is that what I... This is getting worse. The more I try to justify, it just sounds worse.
Let's add to the point. I think
to the person's point.
No, to my previous question. I'm being lost because I wasn't clear on the question. For example, in one reading it'll say a plural word in that verse, plural. Another one will say singular. I gave an example, maybe you forgot. I went to a shop and I said
biscuits and biscuit.
So,
but what about the example from the Quran, just to get my...
It's mentioned in the video by the ex-Muslim. She brings examples on video up to Gonda. I can't recognize his name. Yeah,
you see, the thing is that there's certain words. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll come back to that. But there's certain. Okay, briefly, then we'll come to the haram question.
How does something become haram? I think he's talking about an act.
An act.
Yeah.
How does an act become haram? Okay, well, it's when you enact. You have to be careful when enacting, right? So the question about this, you see, it's how, you know, the script, the Uthmani script, can be written in certain ways that it allows for you to read it in certain ways. So for example, the word zakat or salat in the Quran is written like, it'll be like sad, lam, there'll be a waw. You've probably seen it, yeah? It's a waw and a ta. Now, generally when you write salat in Arabic, you don't write a waw. You just write sad, lam, alif, ta. Now, you'll have a waw in the Quran. Now, things like alif in the Quran, like this, a lot of alifs weren't in the script. They were just added as a stretch. Like, so it'd be just sad, lam, waw, ta. Now, an example is if that ta today is more clearer because we're writing as a ta marbuta, like this round ta with two dots. But if it was just written like ta and not so clear, is this salah, like one alif, or are there two alifs, and is this salawat, plural? Is it zakah or zakawat? See, like this, it's sometimes in the past, like I said, the way they read it, there were different ways of, and some of them did read it as plural, and some of them read it, most of them didn't read it as plural. So that's how, but the plurals are not massively different. It's not like, you know, like, or like in English, you're going to say, I don't know, like mouse and mice. Now the word just looks totally different. It's not like that. It's like with a subtlety. I suppose in English as well, by just adding an S on many words, they become plural. So it's like that. The script allowed for that maneuverability. That makes sense? Ab samajh jaya.
Would you trace that back to Allah then? Both of those readings. One's plural and one's... So doesn't that contradict in the sense
Would we trace it back to Allah,
when
people?
When it was a view to the Prophet and the Sahaba understood it as a singular...
See, now this is the thing that I'm saying, that you see, the Quran in the time of the Prophet, what we understand was much more fluid than today. So hence the Prophet allowed people to read in certain ways that were more natural to them. So some people may have used certain things, like some people may just in their dialect have used plurals more often. Some people may not have used as many plurals in their dialect. So remember, this is like a style of speaking. Then it got constricted. But what we are on today was one of the readings in the time of the Prophet. This was one of the way, perhaps a very popular way, that the Quran was being read. But in the Prophet's lifetime, maybe some companions were reading it, most likely in other ways in line with their dialect. Okay, so does that make sense? Finally, nahi yaar, soch le. Think about it. Any more objections to Allah?
You said dialect. I mean, they were living...
Oh, yeah, I wasn't serious when I said that. No, I'm joking.
Obviously, as you said before, our belief should be based on reason and daleel and iman. You don't want to be, you want to have satisfactory answers so no one can shake it.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu
Akbar. So what you say, I mean, you're talking about Britain is far away. It's like saying in Birmingham, we've got someone that really speaks different dialect and someone, I mean, they lived around each other. How would they have different dialects if they were living next door to each other? I mean, maybe I'm doing a... That's 1,400 years ago.
Well, my anthropologist friend, Chacha, the Arab tribes, there were loads of them, and they spoke different dialects. They weren't like all living around each other. Where are you getting that from? Arabia is massive. If you look at Arabia even today on the map. No, so you get many of the tribes. You're talking about even Hijaz had so many different tribes in it. But if you're gonna, even if when you're going through the grammar books, you'll see, like, for example, Tay, you'll see Hudayl, you'll see these different tribes, and a lot of the readings according to them. So the way we say, like, Alladhina, like Hudayl, Lughatu Hudayl, Alladhuna, they wouldn't say Alladhina, they'd say Alladhuna. Like, that's how they spoke Arabic. You'd see some of the tribes wouldn't make certain things mansoob. They wouldn't, like, there were so many tribes, man. You hear about them all the time. The Prophet was from the tribe Quraysh, which resided around Mecca, pretty much. Quraysh did. But there were many tribes. I mean, in Medina, there were no Quraysh. It was Khazraj, it was Aus. There were other tribes surrounding. There were the Jewish tribes around Medina. In each city, you had different people had their own style of speaking, their own, different. So it was a huge place. It's still, I mean, by the way, it still is a huge place. If you just look at the map. So yeah, so they weren't just all living around like just 10 of them, and one of them goes, but my way of speaking is different.
So Walid bin
Mughira.
When he had the Quran, and he told the leaders of the Quraysh that I know Arabic, like how like all the meters and stuff. But he also said that I also know how the jinn talk. What do you mean by that?
The jinn, yeah.
Like, do the jinn speak?
No, I think that, you see, you've got to, I think that the ancient Arabs, right, they had this thing. The question is that when one of the main chiefs of Quraysh, one of the main antagonists against the Prophet, Walid ibn Mughira, when he, what am I saying? That is his name, isn't it? Yeah, sorry, I'm just went blank for a moment then, yeah. So Walid, when he criticized the Prophet, and he said, well, I know Arabic, but he praises the Quran. He says, وَإِنَّ لَهُ لَحَلَاوَ وَإِنَّ عَلَيْهِ لَطَّلَاوَ وَإِنَّهُ لَيَعْلُو وَلَا يُعْلَى. And he says that he praises the Quran, says that I've not heard anything like this. This is amazing. But the point is that they say to him, come on, man, you're such a don of Quraysh. If you don't criticize the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, then what will people say? So then he says, okay, he says this isn't poetry because I know all of poetry, and this isn't this. Then he says maybe this is magic. وَإِنَّهُ لَسِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرْ إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ الْبَشَرِ. This in the Quran is paraphrasing him. So the question is that I can't remember him there saying that he heard the jinn or whatever, but the ancient Arabs did have this belief that sometimes there's beings in the unseen that speak to them. So you have some ancient pre-Islamic poetry based on jinn speak. So they don't call it jinn. They used to call it, actually they call it what today we call a mobile phone. So they had a word called hatif. Hatif means a voice without a presence. So like you hear a voice but there's nobody here. So in ancient Arabic they call that hatif. So today they just call the phone hatif. Right, so that's why a phone is called hatif in Arabic. But in the past, you'll hear them speaking about the hawatif, or they'll say that this hatif told me this poem. And I think this was just their hallucinations and things like this, and that's what I think. What is it, that ayahuasca? What's it? I think just a lot of DMT. DMT, that's all it was. And yeah, go for it. Question online, people. Does touching the private parts invalidate the wudu? Well, whose private parts are they touching? I think it'll invalidate a lot more than wudu. Well, okay, is that just the question? Go on, the people. Serious question. Is that serious question? Oh, it's serious. Oh. The person's waiting. His salah's been waiting. He's the imam. He's like, if I get this answer, I can finally lead this prayer. So, right. So touching the private parts. Right. Once again, depends on the angle of touch. That part's a blank. Right. So the general understanding that I would say is. How the Malikiya, the school of Medina, teaches that if generally touching doesn't break the wudu, right? But if you're touching with desire, if you get carried away, if one gets carried away, then it breaks the wudu. And I think that's a balanced approach. So you get, on one hand, the Hanafi madhab, which says it doesn't break the wudu no matter what. So one could be indulging in me time.
Does that also apply in touching other people's private parts?
Actually, that's a good point. And
What is done
yes,
without
it
pleasure?
would. It would apply
Without
to
pleasure?
without pleasure.
It would apply or wouldn't?
No, it would apply, I think, according to the Hanafi madhab, under all circumstances, even if it's somebody else's, like just walking in the marketplace, you mean? And hands just like, oh, there goes your wudu. See how many wudus I can break today? So I think according to...
Or anyone me want to become a Maliki.
So according to the Hanafi madhab, it doesn't break at all categorically. And according to the Shafi'i madhab, it breaks categorically all the time. It's just a that person with the towel, just touch, bro, there goes my wudu. So the wudu is like highly volatile on the Shafi'i end. And on the Hanafi end, it's like unbreakable. It's like nuclear resistant. It's like, I ain't no wudu. I'll show you wudu. Right, so, and the Maliki are like in the middle on this particular position, and they see that, look, it doesn't generally, and there is a debate within the Maliki as well, but the general understanding that a lot of the Iraqi Malikis, and that's the one that I generally teach, is that so long as it's not with desire, it's okay. So if a person wasn't just pleasing himself or herself, I suppose, it's got to be gender nowadays, 2019,
Or
have
itself.
to be or itself, sorry, or themselves. refer to them as they, isn't it? The transsexual, isn't it they? Okay.
That's good.
Who's the expert in the room? So long as they're not self-gratifying, then it doesn't matter. The wudu is fine.
The next
But
question was-
yeah, okay, yeah, go for it. So that's So now you can get back to the important things, right? Yep. Sorry.
Somebody's asking, what are your thoughts on the guests of Abraham and Lut? The Quran mentions them as messengers and not angels. Could they have been mortals?
That's a good question, and I am inclined to that understand. So the question, let me repeat the question, sorry. You guys probably can't hear it here. That Abraham, alayhi salam, no, sorry, you're talking about Lut, alayhi salam. Oh, are you talking about Abraham as well?
Abraham and Lut.
Right, okay, yes. So Abraham alayhi salam and Lut alayhi salam, they receive guests in their story in the Quran. So you have Ibrahim alayhi salam presents some food for them, some meat, and they don't take it, and then he thinks, oh my God, is this... Because usually if somebody came with a bad intention, they wouldn't eat your food and stuff, like if they came to harm you. So when he gives them food and they abstain, so he thinks, oh, what's this about? So then they tell him, la takhaf, don't worry, we've been sent, and they give him a message, and they give him glad tidings. Now, I'm not so sure about that particular incident. If this was so there's that incident, and then there's the incident of Lut alayhi salam, where the Prophet Lut has some guests, and when they come, the people in the village are homosexual. They're actually bisexual, but they're homosexual, strongly homosexual. So they are like, oh my God, we definitely need those guys that have come to Lut alayhi salam's house. So they can't control themselves. They control control. So they're trying to force entry into not the best of terms, but they're trying to force entry into the house, I was about to say. And they're trying to take these people by force. Now, could it be that those people weren't angels, they were just people? Not the town people, obviously, that would be silly, them being angels, but the guests of Lut alayhi salam. So I think to that I'm quite inclined that they may have most likely just been people, not angels. But they may have just been referred to in that sense that they had a message or to deliver to Lut alayhi salam, and that was hence part of, because that was what just kind of, it was enough then, because they want to obviously take these people by force and stuff like this. So with Ibrahim alayhi salam, it's possible that it may have just been a normal person. If it was a normal person, then people would have seen him as well. If he was an angel, let's just say, then this is something which normal people wouldn't see. It's just Ibrahim alayhi salam seeing this, almost like a vision like that. So although he's seeing it as real, other people around him wouldn't see those things. So the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and people coming to his house, I think, and just giving him the glad tiding about he'll have a child. I think this could be either way. I think that could, if that was an angel and he was seeing that, and other people can't see that there's no problem with that. But Lut alayhi salam, I think, were actually people. I'm inclined to that understanding, although many people feel that they were people apparently, but deep down they were angels. This is what a lot of people think. But we don't really know about the past. All these stories that come to us of the people of the past, they're not reliable. We just have just snapshots in the Quran. The Quran never goes into so much detail. So it just gives like a brief snapshot. Like, okay, this incident when it happened, it doesn't give you that much detail. So you're not exactly sure what the facts were. Na'am.
Ibrahim Islam's wife sees them and she laughs or what?
Yeah. Now she laughs at the, at the glad tiding. But I mean, if she was part of that, I'm just saying, if it was something that she was part of, it does say that she fadahikat. But there is the thing, where they say, what is it? Ata'jabina min amrillah. Do you find, are you being surprised from what God is capable of? Because the point is, she was so old, and presumably she felt she was beyond the menopause. So how would she have a child? But she wasn't, and she did have a child. So that was the kind of the miracle side of it, that she did have a child from Abraham. And but if that was once again, because we know so little about the actual scenario, we just know just glimpses. So when it's saying that she laughed, did she laugh because she directly heard this, or she heard Abraham telling her that he heard this and she laughed? Or did she, these things are not really clear in the Quran. The Quran isn't trying to make you know the full details of a story. It's just giving you quick glimpses, that's all.
Sheikh, I have a question.
No.
Shamima Begum.
Allah, Shamima Begum.
I just wondered, do you think her case will create a situation in the UK where if Muslims commit a crime serious enough, they'll have their citizenship revoked, even if it's just a sole British citizenship?
Right, okay. The question, if you didn't hear it, people, was from what?
Maj.
From Maj. Maj, you're doing it. Right, it was from Maj about Shamima Begum. Do we think this will set a precedent for people to have their citizenship revoked, even if they're within the UK?
Because there's an English guy, an English convert, his name is known as Jihadi Jack, and he's part Canadian, part British, and he's still got his citizenship.
His British citizenship?
Yeah, it hasn't been revoked.
But has he tried to come here?
He said he wants to come back. He's given an interview to the media.
I thought he was more Canadian.
He's half Canadian. He's got a dual nationality. I think his parents are British and Canadian.
You see, when you say having, I think, I could be wrong, but I think as a case emerges, they then take action, isn't it? So I think the Shamima Begum, her case emerged, it hit the spotlight, then they took action. That said, I have read that the Home Office have revoked citizenships, and although prior to, I think, 2016, they'd revoked a few, and between 2016 and 17, they revoked over 100. Yeah. And it is a scary thing. I think with the Shamima Begum case, looking into it with more detail, because I have given my response already. It's on YouTube as well, where I said she can just go to hell. But looking into it with a bit more detail, I do agree that it is a scary kind of thing that they're trying to say, well, we can revoke, because it's transpired that she didn't, because at the time, the Home Office had said that she was a dual national, most likely. Now it transpires that she's not. She's only British. She's only ever been British and only born in Britain. Under these circumstances, is she, entitled to then come back because she's not from anywhere else? I think that does strengthen her case. And I think the problem is that there were a few problems. This is what I think the British government did, right? So this is my analysis, Shah. This is what I think they did. I think that she probably will come back. I could be wrong, but I think she probably will. And I think the British government, what they wanted to do was they probably thought by bringing her back, it's going to, which it would have evoked such an outcry by the far right, and it would have had such a reaction, and there would have been a lot of racial tension within the country. Islamophobia would have been on the rise. There would have been all this kind of heat which was unwarranted and unnecessary. So I think what they did is they thought, look, let's revoke her nationality, her citizenship, knowing that she doesn't have any other citizenship. But they probably thought, let's do it, pretend we don't know. She'll appeal, like that will now appease the British crowd, because everybody will think, well, fine, they did the good, look, wow, what a harsh response. Which I personally think that she doesn't deserve sympathy. Now, so everybody's calm, she will appeal, and she'll probably win, and she'll come back and they'll just arrest her. So that way there's no outcry, like people know, well, they did their best and she appealed and she won the case. So it's kind of like a win-win scenario. And if they use like Sajid Javid to do it, brown face, it's like an all-round win, isn't it? A win. So I think they played it, game achi khelde. It's like they played the politics, I think, pretty well. But I don't think that they could just declare people within the UK stateless, because you're already within the UK.
No, I think if you leave and
yeah, and I think they've already done that as well on a few occasions.
Aid workers.
And it is quite scary that the problem they've got is that they don't have laws against treason that are so strong. So what they ought to have done, I think what they ought to have done now looking at the case, is arrest her and then update their laws to allow to punish her for treason. The problem is treason doesn't really pretty much exist as, in the past I suppose they used to execute them, but now obviously they're not going to execute her, obviously. So what do? And they're thinking, well, if she comes back, she goes in for a few years and she's out in about 3-4 years. And they're thinking, well, that's going to cause such a reaction with the public. Public's going to get vexed. So it's not worth it. And they're right that it is going to cause a huge reaction. So they need to either increase their laws or do something, yeah.
The people who support her coming back would say, like, she went at 15, so she was groomed. Mm-hmm. Would she still be punished as an adult if she came back?
Now she's an adult. So although she did go, she left at 15, but she's now an adult. I think, to be fair, that the problem with this whole case, there's many problems with it. Obviously, one, the fact that she went off and she joined ISIS and did all these things. And you got to remember as well that, look, I said this on my video as well, that, look, when we see her, we see a brown face, Asian girl.
If it was white, would you have got revoked?
If she's a white convert to Islam.
Yeah.
But then
but
they couldn't have revoked a white convert, because I think because she would have no other nation to lean in on. And here they're assuming that they pretended that she had Bangladeshi nationality. So the question is that, look, we are seeing a brown face, we're seeing a Muslim girl, quite young, in hijab, and it evokes sympathy in us, because obviously how often do we see, we see it so often that like a Muslim girl is being picked on, discriminated against, Islamophobia on the rise, racism, and these kind of things they're very strongly still present in the UK. So we have sympathy. But my point was to say that, look, that sympathy element shouldn't be, you have to remember she went there to be part of a machine that was killing primarily Muslims. Okay, that was their function. They were there to them, all Muslims in the world are kafir. And that's what they were doing daily. They were butchering Muslims. And she went there knowing what they were. She wanted to be a part of that glory state. And if ISIS today was still standing, she would never come back. So you have to remember that she never went on like, hey, I'm going to Las Vegas to chill out. Like, she went somewhere to bloody kill people. So from an Islamic perspective, there is no faith sympathy. These people are enemies of Islam and enemies of Allah and His Messenger. And they're enemies of humanity and compassion. However, I acknowledge that there is a legal argument that when she went, she was not an adult. So that does stand, and I said that. I acknowledge that as a legal argument. The question was, bringing her back is going to cause such a backlash against regular Muslims. Because the far right are going to be like, oh, what the hell, spending our money on bloody terrorists. And then your average kind of Muslim woman out there is going to end up getting attacked. And so is it really worth it? So my point was, why should we be like, this is why I totally was not supportive at all of her coming back, who went on a bloodthirsty mission to kill Muslims. She comes back and then Muslims get attacked because of her. Like, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. So, but I do acknowledge the legal argument. I do acknowledge that. Okay, cool. That was a bit serious talk there, people. Those of you that say I can't do serious talk, there it is, people. So, all right, what are some real questions bothering?
What is your opinion regarding the hadith about the angels cursing the woman who refuses to have intimacy with her husband?
Who refuses to have intimacy? Acha, ya salam. Right. And what about the
citizenship be revoked?
Her citizenship should be revoked and she should be declared stateless. Well, you see, the thing is, this hadith is actually a false hadith. And on YouTube, I've got a whole clip where I go through the sanad, the chain, and I demonstrate the weakness in the chain of this hadith. It is unreliable, and it's not like the Prophet to ever speak like that. The Prophet would never use religious blackmail because it doesn't make any sense. This hadith most likely emerged as, first of all, like a cultural axiom. Like, people in a patriarchal society probably had this understanding, and then somebody along the way just slapped on, Qala Rasulullah, that the Messenger of Allah said. And that's what most likely happened with it. This thing because the hadith, I go through a detail, you can find it, it's on YouTube, it's called Marital Rape is Haram in Islam. And I have a description of including religious blackmail. So I've said that, look, you can, in Islam, in a relationship, if a couple are not having sex, generally, if they're having hardly any, or then that relationship has a problem anyway, presumably, especially unless they're both very asexual, then I suppose it works. But if it isn't like that, then that relationship has a problem because it's not very natural. So either they're having sex somewhere else, the natural conclusion, or they're withholding it from each other, which is like a tool, weaponizing sounds so lethal, weaponizing sex to kind of get back at each other. So I think which means the relationship's kind of messed up anyway. You understand? Now, people shouldn't be doing things like that, because if they are, that relationship isn't going to last in a healthy way for very long. It might last, but it's going to be a very toxic relationship. If you don't like the person you're with, and if life is that unbearable, like you don't want to be in an intimate relationship with them, I would seriously advise, leave the relationship. Don't be in a toxic relationship. if you don't like and you can't bear the other person, because you're only making yourself suffer. But if that be the case, what I was saying is you can resolve this through other measures. Because if you're in a relationship already, then you have a kind of understanding, you know each other. I'm sure there's things that annoy you about each other, but there's things that you probably like about each other. There's things. So, there's many ways to kind of be intimate, to kind of get on that level, like chloroform. Not that's a joke.
But one party is on for it.
Sorry?
What if the parties like each other?
Yeah.
Let's say the woman's got a headache or something.
How many people at this party? Don't worry, go with somebody else in the party. He said, what if the parties are on for it, but one of the party isn't on for it? So the headache doesn't Panadol extra work anymore? Doesn't Nurofen extra effective action? Super quick.
My question is the woman obliged to always
Yes.
be...
No, so I've said, look, there is no Islamic obligation. It doesn't work like that. And it's true that people won't always be up for it, not all the time. And I'm sure that's, across the genders. It doesn't... But if people are withholding this generally, like they're withholding sex from the other person on purpose, they kind of, using that as a weapon or to kind of get back, then I think that relationship is in troubled waters already, really. And so they need to think about that relationship. If they want to be in this relationship. However, if you do want to, let's say, have intimacy and you want to kind of, and I'm sure there's many ways that people who know their relationship best could try and, get to it. But religious blackmail isn't the way. Is not one of those ways. So to say, to say, if you don't, God's going to be upset. That's the angels are like, Does he refer to his thing as God, or what's God here? What has God got to do with this? What has God got to do with his? God's going to be upset. God ain't going to be upset. God's got nothing to do with your sex life. So I think if people are using that is, I've said that is haram, to use religion to blackmail people into having sex, for God's sake. That's so petty and so low. But if a couple are doing this to each other, that they're not being very into it, they don't want to, then they need to question their relationship anyway. But as to regular, sometimes somebody, like you're saying, they're not up for it, whether it's the guy or the girl, maybe they're not up for it, maybe you can wait an hour. No, there should be understanding, right? There should be understanding. They shouldn't be if people ain't up for it, then ain't up for it. But my point is, if these are prolonged periods of time, and there's a sense of withholding, and there's a sense of, then you need to question this whole nature of the relationship. But obviously, if you're having these parties that you're talking about...
I'm just speaking hypothetically.
Right, so, okay.
Can Shia Hadith be followed with the same filtration principles as Sunni fiqh?
As fiqh or hadith, did you say?
Presumably it means Hadith, but it's saying fiqh.
Right, okay. Can Shia Hadith be followed? I think that's an interesting one, because maybe some of their chains, according to Sunni sources, are okay, and some of them may not be. The problem is that, when you get into all this sectarian thing, that the schools have kind of written off each other. So the Sunni schools have written off the Shia school entirely, and vice versa as well. So it's difficult getting chains endorsed. What I would do is look at the content rather than the chain. And the content, so long as it meets the three things, it doesn't clash with reason, doesn't go against the Quran, doesn't uproot Islamic principles, then I would say, it can, in that sense, be followed, if it meets up to that criteria. But it's difficult finding the chain, I think, with from the Shia tradition, because Sunni sources would have written off most of the Shia scholars. Maybe not all, but a lot of them, I think they would have just signed them off anyway, we don't accept them. So it's difficult getting that approved through that route with most, maybe not all. All right, look at that, man. The topics from sectarianism to...
Can you talk about the hadith about the blind man who killed a woman for insulting the Prophet?
Say that again?
About the hadith about the blind man who killed a woman for insulting the Prophet.
He killed his
I don't...
He killed his wife too. I think.
No, that's a weak hadith. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. This incident is actually very weak, I believe, if you bring it up. I remember at the time of the blasphemy case of Asiya Bibi looking into these, it's utterly unreliable. Utterly unreliable that the person killed his wife. And there's another famous story as well about some woman called Asma that was insulting the Prophet and they killed her. Once again, totally fabricated. There's no reliability to these things.
I think the live's been going on for about...
Yeah, I think has it... Whoa, okay. There was actually a message I did want to say. Somebody had put on there. I thought it was an important thing. And more on a serious note, that was about knife crime. So somebody had said that, look, could you mention something about this? And it is quite shocking that the level, the rise in things like knife crime within the UK in the recent years, and now within Birmingham, that we're seeing this. This is shockingly rising. I think this is, and what's really shocking, I mean, I think it's shocking, disturbing, horrifying, no matter who it's happening from and with. But it seems to be rising within Birmingham amongst the Muslim community. I don't know whether it's gang retaliations. I don't know whether it's just turf kind of wars or whatever it is. But you see all these kind of clips going around. People, young people generally stabbing each other. And I saw this clip about a week ago. Some person sitting outside some kind of cafe or restaurant and just bleeding away. And people walking past. And I think that this is, if we become a people that just become okay with things like this, then we have lost all purpose. You understand? That this, we cannot take more seriously anything than the concept of life. The sanctity of life in Islam is paramount. Okay? Within the maqasid al-sharia, the first and foremost thing you have is al-hayat, the an-nafs. Allah says in the Quran that وَمَنْ قَتَلَ, whosoever kills a nafs, فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا, it is as though he has killed humanity as a whole. Like, meaning to Allah now it makes no difference. Like, that is the enormity of the crime. In a hadith, and this, you know, there's At-Tala'i, one of the famous Maliki scholars, he begins his book Aqdiyatu Rasulillah, that let me put together a book on the judgments that the Prophet gave himself, that he ruled, the basically case studies of the Prophet. And he begins with the hadith that the first thing that Allah will take to task on the Day of Judgment is the blood that has been drawn by people, like murder. That this is the first and most gravest of crimes that will be taken to task on the Day of Judgment. And he begins his book with that. Allah mentions in the Quran that whosoever kills muta'ammidan, that Allah excludes if it was an accident, and unfortunately tragedies happen. Whosoever does this intentionally, فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمْ خَالِدًا, that forever the person is deserving of eternal damnation, regardless of him being a Muslim. So we seem to have this thing that, oh, if we're Muslims, you know, man qala la ilaha illallah. That's not what the Quran says. And I think it's really, you know, people who are in touch with younger people especially, that this thing has to be stressed as much as it possibly can. I mean, crime as a whole, but the sanctity of life is something that can never go undermined. This whole deen is meaningless if there is no sanctity to life. So I think that's something that, has to be reinforced and put out there. Inshallah, barakallahu feekum. People, I think we'll leave the live. It's been going on for a while. People, take very good care of yourselves. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. There's some of the deviants sitting right here. You've caught them now.